know where they're going to go, if that makes sense, successfully.
Yeah. And that's the thing you said. They're not fodder. They're not a character that they introduce so that you can watch them get murdered violently and attacked. It's like, here's a person that's surviving the zombie apocalypse and they're close with this other person, and they, if you think about like Andre and Luda, and then he's really vested in her because she's carrying his baby, and he wants that baby to come in, and they have that conversation in the bathroom where he tells Kenneth, like, I want that child to have everything I didn't have a chance to have in this world. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm trying to save that baby. And then when Luda dies, because she gets shot in the head after she turns and he goes crazy, they all find out that this baby zombie that he was holding, those characters, if you don't tell that story between them, it's just another person dying in a zombie movie, man.
Yeah. And what's interesting during that bathroom scene with Andre and Kenneth is really skeptical about Andre, but then when Andre's like, hey, I want to give my kid what I couldn't, Kenneth goes, oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
And Norbert left a comment on this. He also did the Dawn of the Dead original episode, and he wrote, not a bad cast member in this flick. Hit all the notes, hiding a zombie, hiding zombie bites a guy. How long does it take to turn? We learned if you don't get bit and you die, you don't turn. So it's really interesting they covered that in an organic way. Adds a new one. You made what a zombie? The baby. He's like, well-framed shots, the parking lot in the end when the guy picks up the thing and it blows up. And he also Mascajones for choosing the bad ending. And he's like, making this an all-time zombie classic. Dexter on Showtime could have taken a lesson from this. And I love what he said here, right? Will this person become a zombie? No. Okay, cool. It was good, right? You kind of begin to, I don't know, I guess you kind of understand the world, you learn about it organically, and also that ending. We talked about this during the zombie tournament. Yep. It's a punch. People you like die. Everyone dies.
And that's, that's where I think Snyder did such a good job, because he makes you vested in the characters so that when the characters die throughout the movie, you feel that loss. Like, you wanted those people to survive, or you wanted Michael to survive at the end. And, you wanted something good and positive to happen, because in the original, they fly off to the island and they're like, we made it. You guys made it. You made it. And in this one, they go to the island and, they didn't make it.
Zombie Island.
Yeah, Zombie Island. And, I think that when we talked originally, I said, because it was such a bad ending. And you said, oh, I like the ending. And I was like, no, when I say it was a bad ending, it was a bad ending for those characters. It wasn't a bad ending for us, the audience. We loved it. But for those characters, man, to have all that hope and sacrifice and think like, we've got it, we made it, we're on our boat, we're coming into the island, like this is our chance to survive this horrible thing. And then you start to see movement, and then you start to see these things come down the dock, and it's like, oh no.
Yeah. I mean, when was the last time in horror? So I watch a lot of horror movies. I don't know if you do, but when was the last time a horror movie death made you care? Does that make, so when was the last time somebody died in a horror movie and you just felt a punch to the gut?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, it was almost like George Martin wrote this, like he was like, oh, you like this character? Let me take care of that for you. Oh, you've come to like this character now. No problem. I got something for him too. And it's like, I think that, I don't know what it is about human nature that makes us like that. Like, I love Game of Thrones, and I'm not going to spoil anything, but the person who dies in the first season, who I thought was the main character, was like, you watching it and you're like, you can't do that.
Yeah.
You can't do that. You can't kill all the survivors at the end on an island when they finally made it. But they did.
This movie killed off Michael, who had the arc, and, he and Anna had a good relationship, and he just pushes the boat away. It's a cool shot. And listen, there is fodder, right? Steve isn't going to make it. Yeah. The blonde lady's not going to make it. That Eastwood, Norma, the driver, she's not going to make it. But now I was like, when Michael just gets bit and he's like, yeah, I'm just going to stay here and die. You're like, oh, wait, what? This dude's cool. I don't know. It's a weird, it's almost, this sounds weird. Lisa wrote, loved it. The pace, the characters, the zombies. It was fun. This is a film that kind of feels like a Red Bull horror film, but it's also not, but then you care for the characters, but it's paced so quickly. I know we keep saying this. I don't care. If you're listening to this, you probably like Dawn of the Dead. I don't know. I don't know. I think it did a good job. And also, one more thing before we go on break. Dan Allen Sr. wrote, I think because of Snyder's reverence for the Romero classic and his desire to essentially not to remake out of respect to the original Dawn, you get something that's so different that can be enjoyed on its own merit and not constantly compared to the original. Even Romero enjoyed it, and it opened the conversation for him to join up with Universal, who funded his later films. I think Snyder did a great job of capturing the fun campiness of the original, which he does. There's some campiness in it, people getting bonked in the head and stuff like that. Paid proper homage to his film's namesake, but made it different enough that Romero fans could enjoy it without feeling the need to pit it against arguably the most influential zombie film ever made. Which, that's right. Like, you can't watch Dawn of the Dead and be like, well, it's no Dawn of the Dead. Well, it wasn't trying to be Dawn of the Dead, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah, it does. And I'm glad that they didn't do that. Like, I'm glad that they added something to it, because you just, like, because you watch the original, if it followed the original really closely, you would already know what happens during it. There's no, like, oh, God, is he going to make it? Like, this is dangerous. Like the scene where they go down in the sewer and they're trying to get back to the mall, and those things are just coming down. Like, you're like, oh, God, that guy might not make it. He might not make it.
And you like that guy, too. He's getting dragged along headshotting people and doing all that. And so I have a question for you, and I don't know if you're familiar with this, but the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre and then the remake, have you watched both those?
I'm going to say yes, I have. It's been so long that my recollection of them is probably not the best.
Got it. Because, all right, so both Texas Chainsaw Massacre...
It's been remade a few times, right?
Yeah, it has so many remakes. There's prequels and sequels and weird different... There's a main timeline, other timeline. But the original Dawn of the Dead and the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I don't think they could be made today. Because Texas Chainsaw Massacre is such a feral... It's not as violent as you remember, but it makes you feel gross. It makes you feel sweaty. It makes you just feel nasty. Dawn of the Dead is 2.5 hours. It breathes. It gives you characters room. It's something that I don't see hitting the theaters anymore. And it has a lot to say about consumerism. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake, and sorry, John Levengood, member of this podcast, you know him, Doug. He loves the remake. But for me, I fell asleep in the theater. Because it just felt like a retread of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but it couldn't be as hardcore. So it's just a movie that exists. Whereas I think this Dawn of the Dead, it didn't try to be Dawn of the Dead. And that's why it's able to exist. And it wasn't boring. Does that make sense? The Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake felt like a remake. Dawn of the Dead remake doesn't really feel like a remake. It just feels like, I guess it is a remake, but you could call it something else. You could call it People in a Mall. And it would be.
It's just like when we said when we talked about zombie tournament, and I talked about how 28 Days Later is the best zombie movie without zombies. Mm-hmm. So this is probably one of the best remakes without being a remake. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
right? So we're talking that it's just because it was different, it made it better.
Mm-hmm. It had reverence, like Dan said. It had reverence of the original because it features 3 of the same actors. There's a store in there that's named after one of the actresses. So you have Galen Ross, that was the name of a store. Then you have, I can't forget the name. Ken Foree saying like people fornicate and have relationships like that. You know, he was from the original. So it loved it, but it was also its own thing. And I think that's why it's able to exist long after the remake craze, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So how about this? Let's take a quick break, and then when we come back, we will talk more Dawn of the Dead. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Movies, Films, and Flicks. And I gotta say, one thing we haven't touched on is the production design by Andrew Neskoromny. So they went up to Ontario and they shot this movie in an abandoned shopping mall. But I think they did a really good job. Oh, okay. Did you catch this? Metropolis. Did you catch that?
Yeah, totally.
Zack Snyder, Man of Steel.
Yep.
So he's been pumping Metropolis, Man of Steel stuff since 2004. That made me happy, right? And hallowed grounds. I dig the production design on this movie. I thought they did a really good job. I mean, and also, $25 million is not a lot for a budget.
And it made it back in opening weekend, right?
Yeah, it did.
Yeah, like, so after the weekend was over, where the studio was like, all right, guys, we broke even, so that's good.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, and then once it cleared, so they hit that, and then international it did pretty well, and so I mean, even if we add inflation, it probably kicked up from there. So yeah, I mean, and this is also came out in 2004, so DVDs were still selling. This was a big selling movie because you're a college kid, or you know, you're people, you're our age. It's a rewatchable movie. It's I was in college then. Never mind. Wait, yeah, I was a senior in college, Florida State. Go Noles, just not this year. We're terrible. But no, like I had this DVD. It's good to put on, watch, enjoy. I do think it probably is. I guess the biggest complaint about this movie, it's probably who's this movie targeted for? Us, right?
Yeah, it's targeted for us, and I think that I think that if you look at, okay, if you were just gonna do straight horror, and that your target audience is people who like horror movies, but if your target audience is horror, action, and something else that you can mix in there, you're going to reach a larger audience. And I think that the thing that makes this movie fun, you talked about the energy level. It was really an action movie. The original one wasn't so much an action movie, but this really, really was. And I there's just something about human nature that draws us to, like, think about like Commando. Arnold Schwarzenegger in Commando. That is a very entertaining movie, and it's got a lot of energy, but it's not a very good movie.
No.
But it's a fun movie because, that's what Arnold did back in the day. So you can go and watch a movie that, like we had a brief discussion, this objectively is not a good movie, but subjectively it's just so much fun to watch.
Mm-hmm. No, it's a couple things too from Facebook that I want to talk about. Jesse Dio wrote, it had a better cast than it needed, which I kind of love to hear. I would agree. Like, when do horror movies, okay, so nowadays, right, you have Hereditary, or in the 70s, you had The Exorcist and Rosemary's Baby, where you brought in The Omen, Oscar-winning, prestigious, on the rise, kind of sophisticated actors, right? Then you have the 80s, kind of goes into slasher mode. There still is The Fly. There's still certain pedigreed movies. The 90s has that as well. But in '04, I mean, you had Nicole Kidman and the others. And obviously there's other examples where you're probably yelling at the thing right now. But this could have been, like, they went out of their way to bring in some pretty good actors on this. Like, so when he says better cast than it needed, when Jesse says it, I fully agree. It's weird. I think, but you got to understand though, I think the allure of being in this movie is hey, you want to be in a Romero classic? Like, it's, I don't know, I can kind of understand why it got the cast it did.
I can equate it to Star Wars. Like, if you think about when Star Wars was made, other than Alec Guinness and Peter Cushing, who were the well-known actors in that? There wasn't any, But when we talk about the prequels and we talk about the movies that came after, now you're starting to see people like saying, hey man, you don't even have to pay me, but I want to be in this movie because I love Star Wars. So it's kind of like has the same feel towards it. Like, I'm sure that a lot of these actors, when they go around and somebody passes them a script and they see Dawn of the Dead, they're like, I love that movie. I want to be in this movie. So I think sometimes if you have that love for a movie as much as George Romero's classics were loved, like, I would be in any movie Arnold decided to do because, he's been one of my childhood heroes. So I love him, and we talked about zombie movies. If they remade Return of the Living Dead, you don't even got to pay me. I will pay for my hotel, my airfare. I'll just want to be in that movie. You know what I mean? Because I love that. So I think that's what draws some of the better or well-established actors into this because they were probably fans of the original. That's why they did it. I mean, you can always say, well, maybe they got paid a lot of money. Yeah, maybe they did, but sometimes people just want to have fun and be in a movie.
Ving Rhames heard about this script and approached Snyder and said, I'm going to be in this movie. He's like,
and that wasn't a question. Yeah. It was not a question. He's like, I'm going to be in this movie.
I'll bring the meat. So he said, I'm in it. Because they're like, why do you want to be in it? He's like, because I'm going to live. And, in the original Ken Foree, he lives. You think he's going to die, he makes up the ladder at the end. And so, Ving Rhames, imagine that. You're That'd be perfect, though. You're remaking Dawn of the Dead, and Ving Rhames just, like, '03 when they're filming